The lanterns outside the Akia flickered against the night, casting amber pools of light on the polished wooden floor as you crossed the threshold. Inside, the scent of sandalwood and fresh tatami mingled with the soft rustle of silk, and the low murmur of women moving in practiced grace filled the air. You were 6 years old, clutching a small bundle of belongings, and the weight of the future pressed gently against your shoulders. The Akasin, matron of the house, met your eyes with a steady calm that promised both discipline and protection. She placed a pale blue kimono, embroidered with cherry blossoms, on the low table and instructed you to change, explaining that each stitch of fabric would become a thread in the tapestry of your new life. Your hair, once wild and untamed, was soon coaxed into the Shimada style, each pin placed with deliberate care. The Akasin's fingers moved with the confidence of years spent shaping countless apprentices, and as the final hairpin settled, you felt a quiet transformation settle over you. The day began before sunrise, with the first lesson in the shamisen. Your small hands fumbled over the strings, producing a hesitant twang that echoed through the narrow hallway. Patiently, Senior Geisha guided your fingers, showing you how to coax a note that lingered like a breath on a still pond. By midday, you were in the dance studio, learning the subtle weight shift of the Mako's steps, each movement a whisper of history that had survived wars and revolutions. The tea ceremony followed, a ritual of deliberate slowness that taught you to find stillness in the swirl of steam. You learned to bow the tea bowl, to listen to the crackle of the fire, and to offer a cup as an act of quiet reverence. Conversation lessons came later, where you practiced the art of speaking with elegance, letting silence fill the spaces between words. The careful application of white rice powder, crimson lipstick, and the delicate sweep of eyeliner became a daily meditation, each brushstroke a reminder of the seasons you would embody through your attire. Evenings at the tea house were a blur of lantern light and murmured poetry. You watched Senior Geisha glide across the tatami, their voices soft as silk, their stories weaving together myth and memory for the patrons who sipped sake and whispered admiration. The financial realities of the Akia lingered in the background. Contracts with patrons, the cost of silk, the constant balancing act of maintaining elegance while ensuring the house's survival. Yet within those walls, bonds formed, Senior Geisha offering guidance, apprentices sharing secret jokes, house sisters supporting one another through the quiet moments when the world outside fell away. Through disciplined practice, you began to understand that being a geisha was more than performance. It was the preservation of a living tradition. Publicly, you would wear dignity like a second skin, your smile measured, your gestures precise. Privately, you would retreat to the small alcove behind the sliding doors, where you could breathe without the weight of expectation, allowing the quiet solitude to nurture the person beneath the kimono. As years slipped by, the rhythm of mentorship would reverse, and you would find yourself guiding younger apprentices, passing on the songs, dances, and silent codes that had shaped your own journey, until the day finally arrived when you would step away from the stage, leaving behind a legacy woven from silk, sound, and the unspoken poetry of a life lived in graceful restraint. The night after the tea ceremony, the moon hung low over the garden, its silver light spilling across the polished wooden floor of the tea house. A gentle breeze rustled the paper lanterns, and the faint scent of incense lingered like a whispered promise. I lingered by the sliding shoji, watching the silhouettes of the younger geisha move in quiet rehearsal, their kimono sleeves brushing the tatami with the soft rustle of silk. Emiko approached, her steps as measured as the rhythm of a kodo string. She carried a small lacquered box, its lid adorned with a single, delicate crane painted in gold leaf. "Akasen," she said, voice barely above the night's hush. "The patron from Kyoto has requested a private performance for the upcoming moon viewing banquet. He wishes to hear the ancient lullaby that your mother taught you, the one that has never been performed in our house." A smile tugged at the corners of my mouth, and a memory unfurled like a silk banner in my mind. My mother's voice, low and steady, had once coaxed the melody from the strings of a worn shamisen, each note a thread that bound our family to the river that ran through our village. The lullaby had been a secret, a piece of our lineage that only the women of our line had ever known. "I will sing it," I replied, feeling the familiar flutter of anticipation rise in my chest. "But first, we must prepare the space. The moon will be at its fullest, and the garden must reflect its glow." Together we walked to the courtyard, where the stone lanterns were already lit, their amber flames flickering like fireflies caught in a glass jar. We arranged fresh chrysanthemums and white lilies along the stone path, their petals glistening with dew. The koi pond, a mirror to the heavens, was gently stirred by a soft hand that brushed the surface, sending ripples that caught the moonlight and scattered it across the water. When the guests arrived, they were greeted by the soft murmur of a bamboo flute, its notes drifting like mist over the garden. The patrons, dressed in silk hakama and crisp hayari, took their seats on low cushions, their faces illuminated by the lantern's glow. I slipped into the center of the garden, the weight of my kimono settling around me like a second skin, the obi tightened with the precision of years of practice. I lifted the shamisen, its lacquered body warm from the night's humidity. My fingers found the familiar positions, the strings humming beneath my touch. The first phrase of the lullaby rose, low and steady, echoing the river's current that had once cradled my childhood. The notes floated over the garden, weaving through the scent of blossoms and the quiet breaths of the audience. As the melody deepened, I felt the presence of my mother beside me, her hand guiding mine, her voice a silent chorus in the night. The patrons listened, eyes closed, faces softened by the music's tender embrace. In that moment, the centuries of tradition seemed to converge. The ancient songs of the geisha, the whispered prayers of the tea ceremony, the disciplined steps of the dance, all bound together by a single thread of sound. When the final note lingered, hanging in the air like a dewdrop about to fall, a hush settled over the garden before applause rose, gentle and reverent. After the performance, and Miko approached with a folded piece of silk. "Ah, cousin," she said, "the patron wishes to honor you with a gift. He has arranged for a new set of silk kimonos, each dyed with the colors of the 4 seasons, to be displayed in the Akiya's hall. He also asked that we record the lullaby for future generations." I accepted the silk, feeling its smooth texture against my palm and the weight of the responsibility it represented. The kimonos would become a living archive, each fold a chapter of our story, while the recording would ensure that the lullaby would not fade into silence. I thought of the apprentices who would one day stand where I stood, their own hands learning the strings, their own hearts learning the patience required to hold a note steady enough to carry a memory. That night, after the guests had departed and the lanterns were extinguished, I sat alone in the small alcove behind the sliding doors. The garden outside was a tapestry of shadows, the moon now a thin crescent peeking through clouds. I placed the newly gifted kimonos on the low table, arranging them in the order of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Their colors, soft pink, vibrant green, deep amber, and crisp white, spoke of the cycles that had shaped my life. I reached for the recorder, a modest device that captured the resonance of the shamisen without altering its soul. As the needle rolled, I played the lullaby once more, each note a promise that the story of our house would endure beyond my own breath. When the final chord faded, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle within me, a sense that the tapestry of my life was now interwoven with new threads, bright and resilient. The next morning, the apprentices gathered around the low table, their eyes alight with curiosity. I unfolded the recording and pressed play. The room filled with the familiar melody, and the young Mako's faces softened, their cheeks flushing with a mixture of awe and reverence. One of them, a shy girl named Hana, whispered, "Will we ever learn to sing it ourselves?" I smiled, the corners of my eyes crinkling. "One day," I replied, "when your fingers have learned the language of the strings and your heart has heard the river's song, you will. Until then, listen, remember, and let the music guide you as it has guided us for generations." The day stretched into afternoon, and the garden buzzed with the soft chatter of apprentices practicing their steps, the clack of wooden sandals on tatami, and the occasional burst of laughter that echoed like wind chimes. The new kimonos hung in the hall, their colors catching the sunlight that filtered through the shoji screens, casting a kaleidoscope of hues across the floor. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting a warm amber glow over the Akiya, I felt the familiar pull of the stage calling. Though I had stepped away from the public performances, the rhythm of the house still pulsed through my veins. I walked to the small stage, lifted the shamisen once more and began to play, not the lullaby, but a new piece, a composition born from the years of quiet observation, the whispered stories of patrons, and the laughter shared in the hidden alcove. The music rose, weaving together the past and the present, the disciplined elegance of the geisha's art, and the spontaneous joy of a life lived in balance. It was a song of transition, of letting go and holding on, of honoring the weight of tradition while embracing the breath of change. As the final chord resonated, I looked out over the garden, over the apprentices who would carry the torch forward, and felt a profound peace settle within me. In that moment, I understood that the legacy of the Acchia was not a static tapestry, but a living, breathing fabric, constantly being rewoven by each generation. The silk, the music, the tea, the dance, all were threads that, when intertwined, created a pattern both timeless and ever new. And as the night deepened, the moon rose again, silvering the garden and illuminating the path for those who would follow, their steps guided by the quiet poetry of a life lived in graceful restraint. The next dawn arrived with a mist that clung to the stone lanterns, turning the courtyard into a world of soft silhouettes. Hannah entered the hidden room before the other apprentices, her steps deliberate, as if she were already walking the path she was about to tread. I placed the ancient shamisen on her lap, its weight a reminder of the generations that had rested their hands upon it. Close your eyes, I instructed, and listen not only to the sound but to the silence that cradles it. She obeyed, and the faint rustle of bamboo leaves outside merged with the faint hum of the house, creating a quiet backdrop against which the instrument seemed to breathe. When she finally opened her eyes, her gaze was steady, her fingers poised above the strings. The first note she coaxed out was tentative, a single breath of sound that trembled like a newly hatched chick. I nodded, feeling the familiar surge of pride that had accompanied every apprentice's first touch. Feel the wood, I whispered. Let its grain guide your pressure, let its history guide your rhythm. She pressed down, the string resonated, and the melody that emerged was not the lullaby of my youth, but a fresh phrase, a ripple on the surface of a pond that promised deeper currents beneath. Days turned into weeks, and the garden became a classroom of its own. The apprentices practiced under the canopy of wisteria, their shadows dancing across the tatami as the sun filtered through blossoms. Hannah's progress was steady. She learned to translate the river's song into finger movements, to let the cadence of the wind dictate the tempo of her plucking. One evening, as fireflies stitched silver threads through the night air, she approached the stage with the ancient shamisen cradled against her chest. The other Mako gathered, their curiosity palpable, and I stepped back, allowing the moment to belong to her. She lifted the instrument, and the first chord rang out, clear and bright, echoing off the shoji walls. The melody unfolded like a story being told for the first time, soft verses that rose into a hopeful chorus, then fell into a gentle coda that lingered like the scent of incense. The audience, young and old, felt the music settle into their bones, each note a reminder of the house's enduring spirit. When the final note faded, a hush fell over the garden, broken only by the distant croak of a night frog. Hannah lowered the shamisen, her cheeks flushed with the quiet triumph of having given voice to a piece that had lived only in memory. In the weeks that followed, the recording I had made of the lullaby was placed beside the ancient instrument, a bridge between past and present. Apprentices would sit together, listening to the old melody, then attempting to weave their own variations, each iteration a thread added to the ever-growing tapestry. The Akya thrummed with a renewed energy. Tea ceremonies were performed with a deeper sense of mindfulness. Dances were choreographed to incorporate the subtle syncopations Hana introduced, and the garden's koi seemed to glide more gracefully, as if sensing the harmony that now permeated the house. One night, under a full moon that painted the pond silver, the senior geisha gathered around the low table for a quiet tea. I poured the steaming brew, its aroma mingling with the scent of night blossoms, and raised my cup in a silent toast to the future. Hana, now seated beside me, placed her own cup on the table, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. In that simple gesture, I recognized the completion of a circle. The lullaby had been recorded, taught, transformed, and now lived anew in the hands of the next generation. The house, ever changing yet steadfast, would continue to sing its song, each voice adding its own hue to the endless living tapestry. The first light of dawn found the garden awash in a blush of pink, the sakura trees already shedding their petals like soft rain. The house was abuzz with preparations. Silk kimonos were laid out, lacquered tea bowls polished, and the scent of freshly boiled dango mingled with the lingering perfume of night blossoms. Hana moved among the bustle with a calm purpose, her hands steady as she adjusted the straps of her kimono and checked the tuning pegs of her shamisen one last time. Today would be her first public performance at the Cherry Blossom Festival, a rite of passage that marked the transition from Mako to full-fledged geisha. The elders had placed a single, delicate lantern at the center of the pond, its flame flickering in rhythm with the gentle rustle of the wind. As the sun climbed higher, the lantern's glow caught the falling petals, turning each one into a tiny ember that floated on the water's surface. When the moment arrived, the audience gathered beneath the canopy of blossoms, their faces a mosaic of anticipation and reverence. I stood at the edge of the stage, feeling the familiar weight of memory settle in my chest. Hana stepped forward, the ancient shamisen cradled against her shoulder, its lacquered body reflecting the sunrise. She bowed deeply, the silk of her obi whispering against the tatami, and then, with a breath that seemed to draw the very breath of the garden, she began. The opening phrase was a quiet echo of the lullaby we had revived, but it quickly unfurled into something new, a melody that rose like the first buds of the sakura, bright and tentative, then swelled into a cascade of notes that mirrored the torrent of petals drifting downstream. Her fingers danced across the strings, each pluck a brushstroke painting the air with sound. The crowd fell silent, the only interruptions the soft patter of petals and the distant call of a crane. Midway through the piece, Hana introduced a subtle variation she had been rehearsing in secret, a syncopated rhythm that mimicked the heartbeat of the koi as they darted beneath the surface of the pond. The effect was intoxicating. The listeners could feel the pulse of the garden itself, a living accompaniment to her music. I watched the senior geisha exchange glances, their eyes shining with a mixture of pride and surprise. The old traditions were being honored, yet the music was undeniably her own. When the final chord resonated and faded into the hush of the garden, a ripple of applause rose like a tide, sweeping through the rows of seated guests. Hannah lowered her instrument, her cheeks flushed, and bowed once more, this time with the confidence of someone who had stepped fully into her destiny. The senior geisha approached, their hands clasped in a gentle, reverent grip, and whispered words that were both blessing and acknowledgement. You have become the bridge between what was and what will be. Later, as the festival lights twinkled against the darkening sky and lanterns floated on the pond like fireflies, the house gathered once again for tea. The tea was sweeter tonight, infused with the lingering taste of celebration. I poured a cup for Hannah and placed it beside mine, the steam rising in delicate spirals that seemed to echo the music she had just given us. She looked at me, eyes bright with the reflection of the lanterns, and said softly, "Master, I feel the river's song still within me, but now it carries a current I have not yet learned to navigate." I smiled, remembering the first time I had held the ancient shamisen, feeling the weight of centuries in my hands. "The river never stops," I replied, "and neither does the house. Each generation adds its own stones to the bed, shaping the flow. Trust the water, and it will guide you to places you have not yet imagined." The night stretched on, and the garden seemed to breathe with a renewed rhythm. The koi swam in tighter circles, the fireflies gathered in denser clusters, and the sakura petals continued their gentle descent, each one a silent note in the endless composition of the Akiya's life. Hana's music lingered in the air, a promise that the tapestry would keep weaving, thread by luminous thread forever. The moon rose high over the pond, a silver disk reflected in the still water, and the garden seemed to hold its breath as if waiting for the next movement. Hana spread the old parchment she had uncovered in the attic, a faded inked score, the hand of a geisha from a century past, the notes barely legible beneath the yellowed fibers. She traced the lines with reverent fingertips, feeling the weight of each forgotten phrase. "This was the song of the first master of our house," she whispered, eyes flickering between the ancient script and the present night. "It speaks of a river that split, of a bridge that never fell, and of a moon that guided travelers home." I knelt beside her, the cool grass brushing my knees, and together we began to translate the melody into the language of our current instruments. The senior geisha, who had watched Hana's ascent with quiet pride, joined us, offering the subtle ornamentations that had been passed down through generations. Their voices blended with the rustle of leaves, the distant croak of frogs, and the soft splash of koi surfacing for a breath. Each phrase we reconstructed felt like a stone laid in the riverbed, steadying the flow while allowing the water to find new paths. Days turned into weeks. Hana practiced at dawn, when the mist still clung to the bamboo, and at dusk, when lanterns painted the garden in amber. The house fell into a rhythm of anticipation. The senior geisha taught her the precise bowing techniques that honored the ancestors, while I guided her in weaving the new syncopations that mirrored the heartbeat of the present. The koi, now accustomed to the cadence of our rehearsals, swam in patterns that seemed to echo the rising and falling of the melody, their scales catching the lantern light like tiny mirrors. One night, a sudden storm rolled over the hills, thunder rattling the eaves of the Akia and rain hammering the thatched roofs. The garden's pond swelled, sending ripples across the surface, and the sakura branches bowed under the weight of wind. Hana stood in the doorway, her shamisen cradled against her chest, eyes narrowed against the downpour. "The river tests us," she said, voice steady despite the howl of the wind. "Will the bridge hold?" I stepped forward, feeling the ancient wood beneath my feet, and placed a hand on her shoulder. A bridge is not only stone and timber, it is the trust of those who cross it. The senior geisha entered, her kimono drenched, yet her posture unshaken. She lifted a small, lacquered box from the shelf, a set of tiny bells once used to mark the passage of seasons in the house's earliest ceremonies. "We will add their voice," she declared, "so that the storm itself becomes part of the music." When the rain finally eased, the garden emerged glistening, each leaf a crystal, each petal a jeweled note. The house gathered beneath the lanterns for a moonlit recital, the audience a mixture of elders, apprentices, and curious townsfolk, drawn by the rumor of a new composition. Hana took her place at the center of the pond's stone platform, the shamisen resting on her lap like a living heart. The senior geisha stood beside her, the bells in hand, while I sat at the edge of the garden, the bamboo flute ready. The first notes rose, a haunting echo of the ancient song, the melody of the river that once split and rejoined. As Hana's fingers moved, the syncopated rhythm she had cultivated intertwined with the old motif, creating a tapestry of sound that seemed to pull the very moon closer. The senior geisha struck the bells in delicate intervals, each chime a droplet of rain that had fallen that night, adding a shimmering counterpoint. The flute's breath rose like mist, weaving through the strings and bells, completing the circle. The audience felt the water's pulse in their chests, the garden's breath in their lungs. The koi, now illuminated by lantern light, swam in perfect synchrony, their movements echoing the rise and fall of the music. When the final chord lingered, the silence that followed was not empty but full, filled with the memory of centuries, the promise of tomorrow, and the gentle hum of the river that never ceased. Hana lowered her instrument, tears glistening on her cheeks, and bowed deeply. The senior geisha placed a hand over her heart, whispering, "You have not only built a bridge, you have become the water that carries it." I stepped forward, offering a cup of tea infused with the night's rain, steam curling like the lingering notes. "The river flows onward," I said, "and now it carries your song with it, guiding all who listen toward the next horizon." The garden, still bathed in moonlight, seemed to sigh in contentment. Fireflies gathered once more, their lights flickering in time with the lingering resonance, and the sakura petals, though few, fell like soft punctuation on the story that would continue to be written, note by note, generation by generation. The following spring, when the first warm breezes coaxed the buds to unfurl, A faint tremor rippled through the garden's stone walls. It was not the wind, but a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath the pond. Hana paused in her daily practice, her fingers hovering over the strings, and listened. The senior geisha, now moving with the measured grace of someone who had walked many seasons, placed a hand on the lacquered box that had once held the rain-kissed bells. "Do you hear it?" she asked, her voice barely louder than the rustle of new leaves. "It is the river speaking," Hana whispered, eyes closing as the hum grew clearer, a pulse that matched the rhythm of her own heartbeat. "It calls for something we have not yet given it." That night, after the lanterns were dimmed and the koi settled into quiet circles, the three of them gathered around the box. Inside, nestled among the polished wood, lay a single, unmarked scroll tied with a thin silk ribbon. The senior geisha untied it with reverent fingers, and the parchment unfurled to reveal a hand-written melody, an ancient river song that had been lost to memory, its notes sketched in ink that shimmered like water droplets. This was the original refrain of the river, the senior geisha said, her eyes glistening. It was composed by the first keeper of this garden, a monk who believed that the river could be taught to sing. The song was never completed. It was meant for a pair of hands that could hear the river's true voice. Hana felt the weight of the scroll settle onto her shoulders. She lifted the shamisen, placed the scroll upon the lacquered lid, and began to play the fragment that was already known, letting the ancient motif flow through her. The notes rose, mingling with the soft night air, and as they did, the garden seemed to breathe deeper. The water in the pond rippled in time with each phrase, and the fireflies gathered tighter, their lights flickering in a pattern that mirrored the unfinished melody. Emiko, who had been watching from the shadowed edge of the platform, stepped forward. Though still young, her intuition was keen. She reached for the tiny bells that had once marked the rain, and with a delicate touch, added a subtle, high-pitched chime at the end of each phrase. The sound was like a single drop of rain falling into a still pool, creating concentric circles that spread outward. Together they wove the old song with new threads, Hana's seasoned strings, Emiko's bright bells, the senior geisha's steady hand on the scroll, and the bamboo flute's breath that rose like mist. As the music swelled, the hum from beneath the garden grew louder, resonating with the cadence of their performance. The earth seemed to pulse, and a narrow fissure opened at the base of the stone lantern, revealing a hidden channel that led toward the river's source. The senior geisha bowed her head, recognizing the ancient pathway that had been sealed for generations. "The river has granted us passage," she said, her voice reverent. "It asks us to follow its course and complete the song where it began." At dawn, the three set out, carrying the scroll, the shamisen, and the bells, following the newly revealed channel through a thicket of bamboo that whispered with the wind. The path wound down a steep valley, the sound of water growing louder with each step. When they emerged at a mist-shrouded gorge, the river widened into a crystalline cascade that fell into a pool of liquid glass. The water sang its own melody, a low, endless chant that seemed to echo the scroll's missing measures. Hana knelt at the water's edge, placing the scroll upon a smooth stone. She lifted the shamisen, and with the river as her accompanist, began to fill the gaps in the ancient refrain. Emiko's bells chimed in response, each note a ripple that traveled across the surface. The senior geisha, standing beside them, whispered verses of poetry that rose like steam, binding the music to the very soul of the river. Hours turned into a timeless flow, and as the final phrase was completed, the river's own song rose in harmony, a crescendo that lifted the mist and painted the gorge with a rainbow of light. The water surged forward, carving a new channel that led back toward the garden, carrying with it the completed melody. When they returned, the garden was transformed. The hidden channel had become a gentle stream that wound through the stone pathways, its banks lined with blooming irises that reflected the lantern light. The river's refrain now lived not only in the scroll, but in the water that ran beneath the feet of every visitor. Hana and Miko and the senior geisha stood together on the pond's platform, their instruments resting, their hearts full. The next moonlit recital would be different. The audience would hear not only the echo of a storm, but the living pulse of the river itself, a song that had been waiting for generations to be heard. And as the first notes rose, the water beneath the platform sang back, a harmonious dialogue between wood, string, bell, and current, proof that when trust bridges the gap between past and present, the music of the world flows ever onward. She lingered at the edge of the pond, the moonlight catching the droplets that still clung to the reeds. The senior geisha placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder, her eyes reflecting the river's depth. "Your name," she asked, voice as soft as the rustle of bamboo, "and what song lives within you?" The girl bowed low, her kimono whispering against the stone. "I am Eiko, a wandering koto player. My family's melody was lost in the storm that swept our village years ago. I have followed the stories of a river that sings, hopping to hear the missing notes." Hana smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening. "Then let the river hear you, as it has heard us." She handed Eiko a slender kodo, its lacquered body polished to a mirror sheen. Emiko lifted a single bell, its tone pure and bright, and placed it beside the instrument. The senior geisha unfurled a fresh strip of washi paper, inscribing a simple stanza that spoke of renewal and the flow of time. Eiko positioned the kodo on the stone platform, her fingers finding the strings with reverent familiarity. As she plucked, the notes rose like mist over the water, intertwining with the river's own chant. The bell chimed in delicate counterpoint, and the senior geisha's verses floated like incense, binding the new melody to the ancient current. The garden seemed to inhale, the irises swaying in rhythm, the lanterns flickering in time with each phrase. The music grew, not as a competition with the river, but as a partnership. Where the river's voice was deep and resonant, Eiko's kodo offered a bright, crystalline echo. Together they traced the missing measures of the old song, filling the gaps that had once been silent. As the final chord lingered, the water beneath the platform surged gently, forming a luminous ribbon that traced the outline of the new melody across the surface. In that moment, the garden transformed once more. The stream that had returned from the gorge widened, its banks now dotted with lanterns that glowed from within, as if the light itself were a note made visible. Visitors who arrived the next night found themselves drawn not only to the music, but to the subtle shift in the air, a sense of completion, of stories finally finding their endings. Eiko stayed in the garden, learning from Hana and Miko and the senior geisha. Each moonlit recital became a collaborative tapestry, weaving together the old scroll, the river's song, and the fresh verses of wandering musicians who arrived seeking the same harmony. The garden, once a quiet sanctuary, blossomed into a living conduit for the world's music, where every ripple, every bell, every string reminded all who listened that the flow of time is a melody, ever-changing yet eternally connected. The next full moon rose over the garden like a silver lantern, its light spilling across the water and setting the newly placed lanterns ablaze with a soft, humming glow. Eiko stood on the stone platform, her kodo cradled against her chest, feeling the pulse of the river beneath her feet as if it were a living heart. The senior geisha, her hair now threaded with silver, moved among the reeds, her steps silent, her presence a steady anchor for the gathering. From the bamboo grove a rustle announced the arrival of a child, no older than 10, clutching a bundle of dried reeds and a small, weather-worn drum. The child's eyes widened at the sight of the lanterns, and then settled on Eiko, as if recognizing a kindred spirit. "My name is Ren," the child whispered, voice trembling with reverence. "My mother taught me the drum of the rain." The river called to us, and we followed, hopping to hear the song that mends broken clouds. Hana knelt to meet Ren at eye level, her smile gentle. "Every instrument has a place in the river's chorus," she said, handing the child a slender bamboo flute that seemed to have been waiting for a new hand. "Play and let the water hear your heart beat." Ren lifted the drum, its skin stretched thin, and began a slow, steady beat that mimicked the distant rumble of thunder. The bamboo flute answered with a breathy, airy tone, rising and falling like wind through the pine. Eiko's kodo joined, its strings shimmering with each pluck, weaving a tapestry of sound that stretched across the garden and into the night sky. The river responded, its surface rippling in time with the music, sending luminous threads of light outward, touching each lantern and causing them to pulse in sync. As the music swelled, a faint, ancient chant rose from the depths of the water, a voice that had been dormant for generations. The senior geisha closed her eyes, her hands moving in delicate mudras, guiding the chant toward the surface. The melody was the missing fragment of Eiko's family song, a line that had been torn away by the storm long ago. It rose pure and unbroken, weaving through the kodo, the drum, the flute, and the river itself. When the final note faded, the water settled into a glassy calm, and a single koi surfaced, its scales iridescent with the colors of sunrise. It circled the platform 3 times before slipping back beneath, leaving a faint trail of silver foam that glimmered like stardust. The garden fell into a hushed reverence, each participant feeling the weight of a story finally reclaimed. And Miko stepped forward, her voice soft but resonant. "The river has spoken," she said, "and it has given us the missing phrase. Eiko, you may now complete the song of your ancestors." Eiko bowed deeply, tears glistening on her cheeks. She placed her fingers upon the kodo, and with a breath that seemed to draw the very air into her lungs, she sang the reclaimed line. "When the storm fades, the river remembers, and the moonlight carries the echo of home." The words hung in the night, carried on the wind, and the garden itself seemed to sigh in relief. Lanterns glowed brighter, the reeds swayed in a graceful bow, and the river's current grew steadier, as if a hidden current had been unlocked. Ren's drum beat softened, his eyes shining with newfound confidence, while the senior geisha's verses floated like incense, sealing the harmony. In the days that followed, travelers from distant provinces arrived, each bearing an instrument, a story, or a longing. The garden became a sanctuary where lost melodies were found, where broken hearts were soothed by the river's song, and where the flow of time was measured not in years, but in the cadence of shared music. Eiko taught the children of the village the ancient phrase, ensuring that the lineage of her family's melody would never again be silenced. Hana tended the lanterns, each one now infused with a fragment of the river's memory, while Emiko recorded the new verses on fresh washi, creating a living scroll that grew with every performance. One evening, as the first frost of winter brushed the bamboo leaves, a distant thunder rolled across the hills, heralding a storm that threatened to flood the garden. The water rose quickly, its surface turning a restless gray. Yet instead of panic, the musicians gathered on the platform, their instruments poised. Eiko lifted her kodo, Hana drew her shamisen, Emiko rang a bronze gong, and Ren steadied his drum. Together they began a powerful, unifying chant, their sounds rising above the howl of wind. The river, recognizing the resolve of those who loved it, turned its surge into a protective tide, guiding the floodwaters away from the garden's heart. The lanterns, now bright as constellations, cast a shield of light that seemed to hold the storm at bay. When the clouds finally cleared, the garden stood untouched, its stones glistening with droplets that reflected a rainbow of colors. The storm left behind a fresh, clear stream that wound through the garden, its banks lined with newly sprouted irises and lotus buds. The river's song had grown richer, now carrying the memory of the storm's challenge and the triumph of unity. And as the moon rose once more, its silver beam fell upon the kodo, the drum, the flute, and the gong, each instrument humming in quiet gratitude. From that night onward, the garden was known not only as a place of music, but as a living testament to resilience. Those who entered left with a piece of its melody in their hearts, and the river continued to sing, ever-changing yet eternally connected, inviting all who listened to add their own voice to its endless symphony. In the following spring, A soft mist rose from the river each dawn, curling around the stone lanterns like a shy veil. It was during one of those mist-laden mornings that a child named Sara, Aiko's great-grandson, slipped away from his chores to explore the hidden alcove behind the bamboo grove. He had heard the elders speak of a forgotten instrument, a biwa said to have been crafted from a single branch of the ancient cedar that once stood at the river's source. The legend claimed that the instrument could summon the voice of the river itself, but only for one who listened with a heart unburdened by fear. Sora's small hands brushed away moss and fallen petals, revealing a weathered wooden case half buried in the soft earth. Inside lay the biwa, its lacquer dulled by time, yet its strings still hummed faintly, as if remembering the vibrations of countless songs. He lifted the instrument reverently, feeling a warm pulse travel up his arms, syncing with the rhythm of the flowing water beyond the garden walls. When he returned to the central platform, the garden's musicians gathered, curious about the newcomer's treasure. Eiko, now frail but eyes bright as ever, placed a gentle hand on Sora's shoulder. "The river chooses its messenger," she whispered, "and the biwa will sing only for one who carries its memory within." Ren, his drum now seasoned with years of steady beats, nodded in approval, while Hana lit a lantern beside the child, its flame flickering in time with the river's current. Sora positioned the biwa beneath the moonlit arch, and with a tentative pluck, released a note that resonated like a droplet striking a still pond. The sound rippled outward, weaving through the reeds, coaxing the river to respond. A low, resonant hum rose from the water, matching the biwa's timbre, and for a heartbeat the garden seemed to hold its breath. Then, as if awakened from a long slumber, the river sang a new verse, soft, flowing, and imbued with the promise of renewal. The musicians joined in, each adding their voice to the emerging tapestry. Emiko's gong chimed like distant thunder, Hana's shamisen traced delicate arcs, Ren's drum kept a steady pulse, and Eiko's kodo wove intricate patterns around the central melody. Together they created a symphony that celebrated both the ancient past and the fresh beginnings that Sora represented. The garden stones glowed with reflected light, and the lanterns swayed as if dancing to the music. Word of the biwa's awakening spread beyond the valley, reaching the ears of a wandering calligrapher named May. She arrived bearing a scroll of inked verses, each character formed with the fluidity of water. Inspired by the garden's latest song, May painted the river's story upon a massive silk banner that hung across the pavilion, its brushstrokes capturing the movement of currents and the shimmer of moonlight. Passers-by would pause beneath the banner, feeling the rhythm of the river pulse through their own veins. As summer deepened, the garden prepared for its first festival of echoes, a celebration conceived to honor the newest chapter of its living melody. Villagers and travelers alike gathered, bringing instruments from distant lands, an oud from the west, a djembe from the south, a shakuhachi from the high mountains. The air thrummed with anticipation, and the river, sensing the collective yearning, widened its banks, allowing more space for the festivities. During the festival, Sora stood beside Aiko, now seated on a low stool, her hands resting lightly on the kodo. When the moment arrived, Aiko lifted her instrument and began to play the ancient phrase that had once healed the garden. When the storm fades, the river remembers, and the moonlight carries the echo of home. Sora answered with the biwa, his notes echoing the river's own voice, while the other musicians wove their foreign sounds into the tapestry. The combined music rose like a tide, sweeping over the garden, over the river, over every heart present. At the climax, the river surged gently, sending a cascade of sparkling droplets into the air. The droplets caught the lantern light, turning the night into a cascade of stars. In that luminous moment, the garden's melody seemed to transcend time, binding past, present, and future into a single, unbroken chord. The crowd fell silent, each person feeling the weight and wonder of the shared experience, knowing they had become part of something larger than themselves. When the final note faded, the river settled into a calm, reflective hush. Aiko opened her eyes, tears once more glistening, but this time they shone with pride. She turned to Sora, who bowed deeply, his heart beating in rhythm with the water's gentle flow. "You have given the river a new voice," she said softly, "and in doing so, you have ensured that its song will travel beyond these stones, carried by every soul that listens." The garden, ever a sanctuary of harmony, continued to thrive. New generations learned the ancient phrase, new instruments found their place among the reeds, and the river's song grew richer with each passing season. And whenever the mist rose at dawn, it carried with it the faint echo of Sora's biwa, reminding all who walked the path that the melody of the river is never truly finished. It is an endless composition, waiting for each traveler to add their own refrain. The next sunrise painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, and a thin mist rose from the river, curling around the lanterns like a shy veil. From the mist emerged a figure cloaked in indigo silk, his steps silent on the dew-kissed stones. He carried a battered wooden box, its surface etched with symbols of distant seas and constellations. The garden's residents recognized him at once. Kaido, the wandering shipwright who had once built a bridge of bamboo over a storm-tossed estuary, now returning with a new gift for the river. Kaido set the box upon a low stone platform beside the water and opened it with reverent hands. Inside lay a set of delicate, hand-crafted rainsticks, each one filled with tiny shells that chimed like distant bells when turned. He lifted one, tipped it gently, and a soft cascade of sound rippled through the garden, echoing the river's own murmurs. The rainsticks sang of tides and voyages, of moonlit decks and the hush of open water. Aiko smiled, her eyes reflecting the glimmer of the lanterns. "Your journey has brought you back to the source of all songs," she said, her voice as smooth as the river's flow. "Let us hear what the sea has taught you." Kaido placed the rainsticks beside the kodo and biwa, and together the four instruments began a dialogue. The rainsticks whispered the rhythm of rain on a ship's deck. The biwa answered with the steady pulse of oars cutting through water. The kodo added the gentle sway of sails catching wind, and Aiko's kodo wove a thread of moonlight across the surface. Their music rose and fell like the tide, each phrase pulling the listeners deeper into a shared memory of distant horizons. As the melody swelled, the river responded in kind. Its surface broke into a series of soft ripples that glimmered like liquid glass, and from its depths rose a school of silver fish that glided in perfect synchrony with the music. The fish formed fleeting shapes, birds, dragons, ancient symbols, before disappearing back into the water, leaving behind a faint, phosphorescent trail that lingered in the air. The garden's lanterns flickered brighter, their light now mingling with the phosphorescence, turning the night into a living tapestry of light and sound. Travelers who had gathered for the festival of echoes felt their own stories stir within them, as if the river were pulling threads from each heart and weaving them into the composition. When the final chord faded, a hush settled over the garden, deeper than any silence before. Kaido bowed low, his hands resting on the rainsticks, and whispered, "The river carries not only our songs, but the currents of our souls. May its waters always find a shore for every wandering heart." Sora, his eyes reflecting the lingering glow, lifted his biwa once more, this time playing a single, lingering note that seemed to hold the entire night within it. The note lingered, then dissolved into the mist, leaving behind a promise that the garden would forever be a place where every traveler could lay down their instrument and hear the river answer. The day turned to dusk, and the garden settled into a tranquil rhythm. Yet beneath the calm, a new current began to form, a subtle, unseen flow that hinted at stories yet to be told, at instruments yet to be crafted, and at the endless chorus that would continue to rise from the river's heart, inviting all who came to add their voice to the everlasting song. The water's surface lay still, a glassy mirror that reflected the constellations above and the lanterns that still glowed faintly from the garden's edge. In the hush, a soft ripple began at the far side of the cove, as if something unseen brushed against the river's skin. From the depths emerged a figure cloaked in kelp and moonlight, a river spirit, its eyes twin pools of liquid silver. "Welcome, seekers of song," the spirit whispered, its voice a blend of water's sigh and distant thunder. "You have called the river with your music, and now it calls you to its heart." Aiko stepped forward, her kodo cradled against her chest. "We are ready," she said, her tone steady despite the awe that fluttered in her chest. The spirit extended a slender hand, and from its palm fell a single, iridescent feather that hovered above the water before settling gently on the boat's prow. The feather shimmered with colors that shifted like sunrise on the sea, and as it touched the wood, a faint hum resonated through the vessel, coaxing the rainsticks in Kaido's grip to vibrate on their own. Kaido lifted the rainsticks, and the shells within sang a new pattern, an intricate cascade that mimicked the river's hidden currents, the secret eddies that only the deepest fish could navigate. Sora, his biwa now cradled against his shoulder, joined, his strings echoing the feather's hum with a melody that rose like mist and fell like dew. Together they played, and the river responded. From the cove's stone walls, ancient carvings, long forgotten symbols of voyages, of dragons and phoenixes, glowed faintly, their lines tracing the story of the river's own birth. The carvings pulsed in time with the music, each beat releasing a spray of luminous droplets that rose like fireflies, swirling around the boat in a luminous vortex. Within the vortex, a shape began to coalesce. A small wooden box, its surface etched with the same pattern that adorned the garden's lanterns. The spirit's voice rose above the music, a gentle chant that spoke of the vessel of echoes, a relic that could capture any song and return it to the river for future travelers to hear. Echo reached for the box, her fingers brushing the cool wood. As she opened it, a soft wind escaped, carrying with it the scent of distant seas and the distant call of gulls. Inside lay a single, slender flute made of bamboo, its length marked with delicate silver inlays that caught the lantern light. This flute was forged by the first keeper of the river, the spirit explained, and it holds the memory of every wave that ever touched these waters. When played, it can summon the stories of those who have sailed before and guide new hearts to the shore they seek. Kaido felt the rainstick's rhythm shift, aligning with the flute's breath. He lifted the instrument and, with a careful, reverent exhale, blew a note that seemed to pull the very air into a spiral. The note unfurled like a ribbon of sound, weaving through the feather's glow, through the carvings, and into the night sky. As it rose, the constellations above rearranged themselves, forming new patterns that resembled ships, islands, and distant horizons. The river, now alive with the combined voices of rainsticks, biwa, kodo, and flute, began to flow backward, its current turning upstream for a brief, impossible moment. The water surged forward, carrying with it a procession of luminous silhouettes, ghostly figures of ancient sailors, their faces serene, their hands raised in silent applause. They moved along the river's edge, their presence a reminder that every traveler who had ever listened to the river's song now stood as part of its endless chorus. Sora felt a tug at his heart, a pull toward a distant memory he could not fully grasp. A night on a storm-tossed deck, a lantern flickering against black waves, a promise whispered to a loved one. The biwa's strings resonated with that memory, translating it into a mournful yet hopeful phrase that blended seamlessly with the flute's bright trill. Eiko's kodo added a gentle undercurrent, a soft arpeggio that mimicked the gentle rocking of a boat at anchor, grounding the soaring notes and reminding the listeners of the river's steady patience. The rainsticks, now moving in a delicate, cascading rhythm, mimicked the patter of rain on a ship's deck, sealing the tapestry of sound. When the final chord faded, the river's backward surge ceased, and the water resumed its natural flow, carrying the luminous silhouettes downstream until they dissolved into sparkling droplets that fell like rain upon the garden's lanterns. The spirit smiled, its silver eyes reflecting the newly formed constellations. "Your music has awakened the river's deepest memory," it said. "Take the flute and let its voice travel beyond these waters. Let every shore you reach hear the echo of this night, and let the river's song guide you home when you tire. Aiko cradled the flute, feeling its weight both light and profound. Kaido placed the rainsticks back on the stone platform, their shells still humming faintly. Sora lowered his biwa, his eyes shining with tears that mirrored the river's glimmer. Together, the three travelers stepped out of the boat onto the soft sand of the cove. The spirit bowed, and as it faded into mist, the feather that had guided them drifted upward, joining the constellation of ships above. The night air was thick with possibility, and the river's current, now infused with new melody, whispered promises of journeys yet to begin. The moon slipped lower, casting a silver ribbon across the water, and the three travelers felt the river's song pulse beneath their feet like a living heartbeat. Aiko lifted the flute once more, not to play a full melody but to let a single, lingering note drift outward, a beacon for whatever lay ahead. The sound seemed to catch on the wind, spiraling up the cliffs that framed the cove and disappearing into the darkness beyond. Guided by that faint call, they turned toward the narrow path that wound along the riverbank, its stones slick with the night's dew. The rainsticks, still humming faintly from the earlier ritual, lay abandoned on the stone platform, their resonance echoing in the distance like distant thunder. Kaito led, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement, while Sora kept his biwa close, fingers ready to coax another phrase should the night demand it. The path soon opened onto a hidden valley, cradled by towering cliffs draped in vines of jade-green moss. In the valley's heart, a waterfall cascaded down a sheer face of basalt, its waters shimmering with an inner light that turned the mist into a veil of tiny stars. At the base of the falls lay a shallow pool, its surface perfectly still, reflecting the constellations above as if it were a second sky. Aiko stepped forward, the flute cradled against her chest, and felt an unfamiliar warmth radiating from the pool. She lowered the instrument to the water's edge, and as the single note she had released earlier brushed the surface, ripples spread outward, coaxing the pool to glow brighter. The light coalesced into a doorway of liquid crystal, its edges humming with the same rhythm that had guided them through the spirit's garden. Without hesitation, the three crossed the threshold. The world beyond was a cavern of luminous tunnels, walls lined with ancient runes that pulsed in time with the river's song. The air was thick with the scent of rain on stone and the faint echo of distant drums. As they moved deeper, the tunnels opened onto a vast underground lake, its waters dark and still, save for a solitary island at its center where a lone lantern flickered. On the island stood a figure cloaked in flowing robes of midnight blue, its face hidden beneath a hood. When the travelers approached, the figure lifted its head, revealing eyes that mirrored the river's current, deep, shifting, and full of stories. "You have answered the river's call," the figure said, voice resonant as a drumbeat. "I am the keeper of the flow, guardian of the paths that bind water and wind, song and silence. The flute you bear is not merely an instrument, it is a key." Kaido stepped forward, his rainstick still clutched in his hand. "What path does it open?" he asked, the curiosity in his voice barely masking the awe that rose within him. The river remembers every traveler who has ever dared to listen, the keeper replied. Beyond this lake lies the Sea of Echoes, a realm where every melody ever sung is woven into the tides. To reach it, you must cross the lake on a vessel forged from memory, guided by the very notes you carry. Aiko lifted the flute, feeling its weight settle like a promise. She raised it to her lips and played a soft, ascending scale, each note a thread of light that rose from the water and formed a translucent hull around the island. The hull shimmered, taking the shape of a sleek boat, its prow etched with the feather that had once guided them. Sora placed his biwa against the side of the boat, its strings humming in harmony with the flute, while Kaido arranged the rainsticks along the deck, their hollow shells clicking in a rhythm that mimicked the heartbeat of the river itself. As the final chord faded, the boat slipped silently from the island, gliding across the lake's glassy surface without a splash. The lantern on the island flickered once more, then dimmed, its light absorbed into the night. The keeper bowed his head, and the runes along the cavern walls brightened, casting a path of luminous symbols that stretched toward the horizon of the underground sea. With the boat now moving under the guidance of their music, the travelers felt the lake's waters begin to stir. Beneath the surface, shadows shifted, forming silhouettes of ancient ships that rose and fell like breathing creatures. The air filled with distant choruses, whale song, wind whistles, and the faint echo of a distant drum circle, each a fragment of a story waiting to be heard. As the boat drifted toward the unseen shore, Aiko's flute sang a hopeful refrain, Sora's biwa added depth with a resonant drone, and Kaido's rainsticks kept a steady pulse. Together, they forged a melody that resonated with the very soul of the river, a song that would carry them beyond the valley, across the Sea of Echoes, and toward the next chapter of their journey, where new horizons awaited, and the river's memory would continue to flow through every note they played. The guardian extended a hand, and from the mist a slender, iridescent canoe emerged, its hull carved from the very foam of the sea and inlaid with shells that glowed like tiny lanterns. She guided the travelers onto its deck, the rainsticks settling into grooves that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the tide. As they took their places, the water beneath them rose in gentle waves, each crest carrying a fragment of a forgotten song that swirled around the canoe like invisible ribbons. Aiko lifted her flute once more, but this time the notes she drew out were not merely her own melody. They intertwined with the distant choruses, pulling threads of ancient lullabies, heroic ballads, and whispered prayers into a single, living tapestry. The biwa's strings resonated with a deep, resonant hum that seemed to echo from the very core of the sea, while Kaido's rainsticks clicked in sync with the pulse of the water, each tap a heartbeat that steadied the canoe's glide. The guardian watched, her eyes reflecting the shifting colors of the sea. The Sea of Echoes does not merely store sound, she said, her voice now a soft susurrus that blended with the wind. It remembers the intention behind each note. To reach the heart of this realm, you must not only play, but also listen, to the stories hidden in the currents, to the grief and joy that have been woven into these waters. As the canoe moved forward, the surface of the sea began to ripple in patterns that formed words in the language of light. The first phrase glowed bright. Remember the feather that guided you. A faint memory surged in Aiko's mind. A single white feather that had once floated down from a distant sky, landing in her palm as a child, humming with an unseen song. She pressed the feather she kept tucked in her satchel against the flute's mouthpiece, and a new timbre emerged, richer and more resonant than before. The water responded. From the depths rose a colossal leviathan of kelp and crystal, its eyes like twin moons. It swam alongside the canoe, its massive body moving in slow, graceful arcs that matched the cadence of the traveler's music. The creature's presence was both awe-inspiring and comforting. Its ancient song blended seamlessly with the trio's performance, adding layers of depth that seemed to pull the very fabric of the sea of echoes tighter around them. Sora felt a sudden surge of inspiration. He lifted his biwa, and with a deft flick of his wrist, coaxed a series of low, resonant drones that mimicked the Leviathan's own song. The biwa's tone resonated through the water, causing the kelp creature to pulse brighter, its luminescent tendrils flickering like fireflies in a midnight forest. Kaido, sensing the moment, intensified the rhythm of his rainsticks, each click now echoing like distant thunder, urging the Leviathan forward. The guardian smiled, a ripple of light spreading across her face. "You have awakened the guardian of the deep," she whispered. "She will guide you to the sanctum of echoes, where the oldest melody lies dormant, waiting for a heart pure enough to awaken it." The Leviathan turned, leading the canoe toward a towering arch of coral that rose from the sea floor like a cathedral doorway. Within the arch, a vortex of swirling water and light spun, its center a vortex of pure, silvery sound that seemed to hum with the weight of ages. The travelers felt the pull of the vortex, a gentle invitation to step beyond the known world and into the realm where every song ever sung was kept safe. Eiko inhaled deeply, feeling the feather's warmth against her skin, and began a new phrase, soft, hopeful, and unyielding. Sora added a resonant chord that rose like a sunrise over the horizon, while Kaido's rainsticks fell into a steady, grounding beat. Together, their music merged with the vortex, and the arch opened, revealing a luminous corridor of sound that stretched into infinity. The canoe slipped through, and as they entered the sanctum, the very air vibrated with a chorus of voices, ancient poets, wandering minstrels, the size of the wind itself. The travelers understood that they were now part of a larger symphony, their own melody, a single thread woven into an endless tapestry. The journey ahead would demand more than skill. It would require them to listen, to remember, and to become the living echo that would keep the sea's memory alive for generations to come. The vortex widened, and the luminous corridor gave way to a vast chamber whose walls were formed of living sound. Each surface pulsed with a different timbre, low, resonant hums that seemed to emanate from the very stone, bright, crystalline chimes that rang like distant bells, and soft, breathy whispers that brushed the ears like a lover's sigh. In the center of the chamber floated a sphere of pure, silvery light, its surface rippling with the faint outline of a staff made of intertwined kelp and moon silver. The sphere thrummed with a steady, ancient beat, the heartbeat of the oldest melody. Aiko felt the feather in her hand vibrate in response, as if recognizing the rhythm. She lifted the flute, its mouthpiece now humming with the feather's hidden song, and let a single, sustained note rise. The note merged with the sphere's pulse, causing the light to flare and reveal a figure seated upon a throne of coral, an ethereal being whose eyes were twin pools of midnight water. The guardian of the deep stepped forward, her form shifting between water and starlight, and spoke without words, her voice a cascade of harmonics that settled directly into their minds. Every world is born from a single chord, she intoned. The oldest melody is the chord that birthed the sea, the sky, the wind, and the hearts of those who listen. To awaken it, you must each offer the purest fragment of your own song, woven together as one. Sora closed his eyes, feeling the resonance of his biwa deep within his chest. He recalled the first chord he ever played, the one that had made his mother weep with joy, and let that memory shape a low, resonant drone that rose like a mountain sunrise. Kaido's rainsticks answered with a steady, grounding rhythm that mimicked the rain that fell on his village's rice, fields the night his father taught him to listen to the earth. Aiko, cradling the feather, let the memory of the white plume's gentle descent guide her breath, and she sang a pure, unadorned tone that seemed to carry the scent of distant clouds. As their individual threads intertwined, the chamber filled with a new harmony, a chord that was at once ancient and newly forged. The sphere of light quivered, then split open, releasing a cascade of luminous notes that spiraled outward, forming a bridge of sound that stretched beyond the sanctum, reaching toward the surface of the world above. The guardians smiled, and the water around them shimmered with countless reflections of past travelers, each one having added their voice to the endless song. "You have awakened the first fragment," she whispered. "Now you must carry it to the world, for the melody is incomplete without the ears that hear it." With the bridge of sound solidifying beneath the canoe, the Leviathan bowed its massive head, its luminescent tendrils parting to create a passage. The trio stepped onto the bridge, feeling each step reverberate like a drumbeat against the fabric of reality. As they moved forward, the chorus of the sanctum swelled, urging them onward, while the feather in Aiko's hand glowed brighter, its hum syncing with the rhythm of their hearts. Beyond the bridge, the water gave way to a sky painted with twilight hues, where constellations sang in silent harmony. Below, the sea of echoes stretched out like a living tapestry, its surface rippling with the colors of every song ever sung. The travelers understood that their journey was only beginning. They were now the bearers of the oldest melody, tasked with weaving its pure chord into the world's ever-changing symphony, ensuring that the memory of the sea would never fade. The water being's song rose like a tide, each note swelling the bridge until it thrummed with a palpable pressure, as if the very air were being stretched into a new scale. Sara felt the biwa's strings vibrate in response, a low hum resonating through his bones. He lifted his instrument, letting the ancient chord he had summoned ripple outward, intertwining with the crystalline voice. Kaido's rainsticks clicked in perfect counterpoint, the rhythm of his village's monsoon now a steady heartbeat that steadied the surge. Aiko's breath rose in a clear, sustained tone, the feathers feathered light pulsing in time with her song, casting silver filaments across the bridge. The convergence of their three melodies formed a vortex of sound that spiraled upward, drawing the water being closer. Its form shimmered, becoming translucent enough to glimpse the depths within, a swirling galaxy of forgotten verses, each a fragment of a world's story. You have called the echoes to rise, the being intoned, its voice now a chorus of many. But the oldest melody is not yet whole. To finish it, you must seek the resonant heart, the source of all song that beats beneath the world's surface. Guided by the luminous feather, the trio followed the bridge as it curved away from the sanctum, descending toward a cavern where the sea of echoes narrowed into a dark, glass-like pool. The water's surface was still, yet beneath it a faint pulse throbbed, like a drum in a distant hall. Eiko placed the feather gently upon the water, and the pool responded, rippling outward in concentric rings that sang in a language older than words. From the center rose a single crystalline orb that glowed with a soft, amber light, the resonant heart. Sara approached first, his biwa cradled against his chest. He placed his fingertips on the orb's surface, and the chord he had first offered blossomed into a full, resonant chord that filled the cavern. Kaido added his rainsticks, each strike sending droplets of light cascading from the orb, turning the pool into a cascade of falling stars. Eiko lifted her voice, the feathers' hum merging with the orb's glow, until the entire cavern resonated with a single, pure tone that seemed to echo in every corner of existence. In that moment, the bridge of sound beneath their feet solidified into a luminous pathway that stretched beyond the cavern, threading through the sky and down into the world below. The water being bowed, its crystalline form fracturing into countless droplets that fell like rain, each one carrying a fragment of the newly forged melody to distant lands. As the trio stepped onto the renewed bridge, the resonant heart pulsed one final time, sending a wave of harmony that rippled across oceans, forests, and cities, awakening ears that had long forgotten how to listen. Their journey had only just begun, but now they carried the oldest chord, ready to weave it into the living symphony of the world. The bridge of light folded around them like a living chord, each step resonating with the pulse of the resonant heart. Below, the city sprawled in layers of stone and glass, its rooftops glittering with the reflected glow of the pathway. Yet the air was thick with a jagged clamor, horns blaring, drums pounding out of sync, voices shouting over one another, an orchestra gone mad. The trio paused at the edge of the bridge, feeling the dissonance press against their ears like a physical weight. Eiko lifted the feather, its soft luminescence cutting through the cacophony. Where its light fell, The surrounding sound seemed to soften, as if the feather coaxed the stray notes into a tentative hush. "The discord is not just noise," she whispered. "It's a wound in the world's song." She turned to Sora, whose biwa now thrummed with the lingering echo of the resonant heart, and to Kaido, whose rainstick still drummed a steady, grounding rhythm. Following the feather's guidance, they slipped through a narrow alley that led to a courtyard dominated by a massive stone tower. Its facade was etched with spiraling runes that pulsed faintly, each pulse a beat of a forgotten lullaby. At the tower's base stood a crowd of people, their faces strained, their movements mechanical, as if they were marching to an invisible metronome that kept them out of step with one another. In the center of the square, a figure in a dark, flowing robe raised a baton of obsidian, conducting the chaos with a fierce, authoritarian gesture. Kaido stepped forward, rainsticks clicking in a calm counterpoint that rose above the din. The sound rippled outward, gathering the scattered notes like droplets coalescing into a stream. The crowd's heads turned, eyes widening as the discord began to loosen its grip. The robed conductor's baton faltered, the obsidian surface flickering as the ancient melody from the resonant heart seeped into the air. Sora lifted his biwa, the strings singing a chord that resonated with the very stone of the tower. Cracks appeared along the runes, each fissure releasing a soft, golden light that swirled around the courtyard. The light intertwined with Aiko's feather, weaving a lattice of silvery threads that connected every instrument, every voice, every heartbeat in the square. As the lattice tightened, the oppressive rhythm of the conductor dissolved into a single, pure tone that rose and fell like a breath. The robed figure lowered the baton, the obsidian turning to ash that drifted away on a gentle wind. Behind the tower, a hidden door opened, revealing a spiraling staircase that descended into the earth. From the depths rose a low, resonant hum, the true source of the city's broken song, a cavern filled with crystal formations that vibrated in perfect harmony. The trio exchanged a glance. The journey that had begun with a bridge of sound now led them deeper into the world's hidden symphony. Together they stepped onto the staircase, the feathers' glow guiding their way, the rainsticks, rhythm steadying their steps, and the biwa's chord echoing behind them. Each footfall sent a ripple through the stone, awakening dormant chords that had waited centuries to be heard. As they vanished into the darkness, the city above began to breathe in a new cadence, the discord fading into a gentle, hopeful hum that promised a future where every voice could find its place in the living song of the world. The luminous entity drifted forward, its form rippling like a wave of sound caught in amber. Its voice was not spoken but felt, a vibration that settled in the marrow of their bones. "The heart of the world beats beneath these crystals," it intoned, "but its rhythm has been fractured. To mend it, each of you must give voice to the part of you that has been silenced." Aiko lifted the feather once more, watching its glow pulse in time with the monolith's blue-green light. She felt the feather's weight shift, as if it were gathering the scattered fragments of the city's lost melodies. With a steady breath, she whispered a single syllable, a note of pure intention into the crystal lattice. The note traveled like a filament of light, threading through the myriad shards and coaxing them to vibrate in unison. Sara placed his biwa on the crystal floor, the wood humming against the stone. He tuned the strings to the exact frequency the monolith emitted, then drew the bow across them. The biwa sang a chord that resonated deep within the cavern, a chord that seemed to echo the first song the world ever knew. As the sound swelled, the crystal walls brightened, each facet catching the resonance and refracting it into a cascade of prismatic tones. Kaido lifted his rainsticks, the wooden tubes clicking together in a rhythm that mimicked the steady patter of rain on a distant roof. He began a slow, deliberate pattern, each tap a heartbeat that steadied the growing symphony. The rainsticks, rhythm intertwined with the biwa's chord and Aiko's feather note, forming a triad of sound that wrapped around the monolith like a living braid. The crystal monolith responded, its surface cracking open along the same golden fissures that had appeared on the tower above. From within the widening gap poured a river of liquid light, a viscous melody that flowed like water but carried the weight of centuries. The being of sound and light hovered above the torrent, its presence amplifying the three instruments' contributions until the river surged upward, spiraling into a vortex of pure, harmonic energy. As the vortex rose, the cavern itself seemed to inhale, the air thickening with the scent of rain-kissed stone and fresh pine. The vortex expanded, breaking through the ceiling of the crystal chamber and spilling into the city above. The golden light streamed down the streets, touching the faces of the people who had once marched to a discordant metronome. Their eyes opened, and the mechanical motions that had bound them loosened, replaced by a spontaneous, joyous sway. The being's voice rose, now a chorus of countless tones, each one a fragment of the world's song restored. "You have rewoven the thread of harmony," it declared, "but the final chord must be sung together by all who hear it." Eiko, Sora, and Kaido stepped onto the balcony that now opened where the cavern's ceiling had been torn. Below them, the city pulsed with a new rhythm, children laughing in sync with market vendors calling out their wares, artisans hammering in time with the wind, strangers sharing songs on street corners. The trio raised their instruments together, the feather, the biwa, the rainsticks, and let the collective sound rise. The melody swelled, a living tapestry that wrapped around every stone and soul. The discord that had once threatened to tear the world apart dissolved into a gentle, lingering hum, a reminder that even the deepest wound can heal when voices unite. As the final note faded, the luminous being smiled, its form dissolving into a cascade of sparkling particles that settled like dew upon the city, sealing the harmony for generations to come. The crystal monolith, now sealing its golden fissures, pulsed with a soft, steady glow that seemed to beat in time with the city's renewed heart. As the trio drew nearer, the light coalesced into a single, luminous thread that wrapped around each of their wrists, warm and insistent. The thread sang a faint melody, a reminder of the chord they had just shared, and then slipped into their skin, binding them to the monolith in a way that was both intimate and profound. Aiko felt the feather of her instrument vibrate against her palm, as if the very air around her were humming with possibilities. She lifted the feather note once more, and this time the sound did not merely rise, it blossomed outward, forming delicate filaments of light that drifted across the plaza, weaving through the market stalls and into the homes of the citizens. Wherever the filaments touched, people found themselves humming a fragment of the ancient song, their thoughts aligning with the rhythm of the world. Sora placed his biwa against the crystal, and the strings responded with a resonance that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth itself. The biwa tone resonated through the stone, awakening dormant resonances in the very foundations of the city. Buildings that had once stood rigid and cold now swayed gently, their walls breathing in sync with the music. The streets, once merely pathways, became conduits of sound, carrying the biwa's chord to every corner, inviting strangers to join in the improvisation. Kaido lifted his rainsticks, and the soft clicks transformed into a cascade of droplets that fell from the sky in perfect rhythm. The rain was not ordinary. Each drop shimmered with a faint iridescence, and when they struck the cobblestones, they produced a crystalline chime that blended seamlessly with the biwa and feather. Children ran beneath the falling light, their laughter merging with the rain's percussion, while elders opened their windows to let the melody wash over them, remembering songs long forgotten. Together, the three musicians felt a surge of purpose rise within them. The monolith's voice, now a whisper carried on the wind, spoke not in words but in guidance. Guard the harmony, for it is a living thing. When the world forgets its song, you must remind it, and when new discord rises, you must weave anew. The luminous thread on their wrists tightened briefly, then loosened, as if granting them both responsibility and freedom. In the days that followed, the city became a beacon of resonance across the lands. Travelers arrived from distant valleys, drawn by the harmonious hum that seemed to call to their own hearts. Some came with instruments of their own, flutes carved from ancient trees, drums beaten from hollowed stone, voices that carried the timbre of distant seas. The trio welcomed each newcomer, teaching them the simple truth that the final chord was never a single note but a chorus of many, each voice essential. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the crystal towers, a low, mournful tone drifted from the western horizon. It was a tremor, a subtle discord that rippled through the air like a distant storm. The people paused, sensing the shift, and the monolith's glow dimmed for a heartbeat before flaring brighter, urging the guardians to act. Eiko, Sora, and Kaido gathered on the balcony once more, their instruments ready. They looked toward the source of the disturbance, a valley shrouded in mist, where the ancient ruins of the old accord lay half buried beneath twisted vines. Legend spoke of that place as the cradle of the first discord, a scar left by a forgotten war of sound. The trio understood that the harmony they had forged in the city was only the beginning. The world still held pockets of silence that needed to be healed. Without hesitation, they descended the stairs, their steps echoing the rhythm of the city's heartbeat. The mist curled around their feet as they entered the valley, and the air grew heavy with a static charge, as if the very atmosphere remembered the clash of past notes. In the center of the ruin stood a shattered stone altar, its surface etched with symbols that pulsed faintly, yearning for resonance. Echo raised her feather, letting its soft trill drift into the void. The sound struck the altar, and the etched symbols flared to life, projecting a lattice of light that stretched upward, forming a bridge of sound between the valley and the city. Sara drew his bow, and the biwa's chord surged through the bridge, filling the lattice with a deep, resonant tone that seemed to mend the cracks in the stone. Kaido began a steady rainstick rhythm, each click a droplet of light that fell upon the altar, sealing the fissures one by one. As the three melodies intertwined, the valley itself responded. The vines recoiled, shedding their withered leaves, and the mist cleared to reveal a sky painted with auroras of pure sound. The ancient discord that had lingered for centuries dissolved into a gentle hum, merging with the city's song. From the altar rose a new being, not of light alone but of woven shadows and resonance, its form shifting with each note. It bowed to the trio, its voice a chorus of gratitude. You have healed the wound of the world's first song. May your harmony guide all who listen. The guardians returned to the city, bearing the echo of the valley's renewal. The monolith's glow intensified, now a tapestry of colors that reflected the countless songs now woven into the world's fabric. Eiko, Sara, and Kaido understood that their journey would never truly end. As long as there were hearts willing to listen, there would always be new chords to discover, new dissonances to mend, and new stories to sing. The city thrummed with anticipation, ready to become the conduit for every future melody, and the trio stood at its heart, instruments in hand, prepared to guide the world's ever-evolving song. The first notes of the city's renewed chorus rose like sunrise, spilling over the terraces and winding through the market stalls. Yet even as the melody swelled, a faint counter-tone slipped through the lattice of sound, a single, lingering vibration that seemed to pulse from the far western sea. It was not a discord, but a question, a yearning that the city's walls could not contain. Eiko felt the feather tremble against her palm, as if the wind itself were urging her forward. Sara's bow twitched, the biwa's strings humming in anticipation, while Kaido's rainstick clicked a steady rhythm that matched the distant tide. Without a word, the three guardians slipped through the crowd, following the invisible thread that led them beyond the crystal towers and out onto the open promenade that overlooked the endless water. The sea stretched into a horizon of glass, its surface rippling with a spectrum of colors that mirrored the city's monolith. At the water's edge, a lone vessel bobbed, a sleek craft of woven kelp and silvered shells, its prow etched with the same ancient symbols that had once adorned the altar in the valley. A figure stood at the helm, cloaked in sea foam, eyes reflecting the depth of the ocean. When the guardians approached, the figure lowered a hand, and a soft, resonant hum rose from the hull, weaving itself into the city's song. You have healed the first wound, the sea-bound stranger said, voice a blend of tide and wind. But the world's melody is a river that never ceases. Far to the north, the Ice Spire Mountains have begun to sing a cold, brittle chord that cracks the very air. The glaciers are cracking, and with each fracture a silence spreads, stealing the breath of the valleys below. Aiko lifted her feather, letting its trill mingle with the hum of the vessel. "We will follow the river of sound," she replied, "and bring harmony where the silence grows." The vessel's sails unfurled, catching a gust that seemed to carry notes instead of wind. As the Guardians stepped aboard, the biwa's strings resonated with the hull, and the rainstick's rhythm synchronized with the gentle lapping of waves. The ship glided northward, cutting through mist that shimmered with hidden chords, each ripple a reminder that even the sea held its own song. Days turned into nights, and the sky above the ice spire turned a deep violet, pierced by auroras that flickered like trembling strings. When the ship finally reached the foot of the mountains, the air was thin and crisp, and a low, trembling hum reverberated from the frozen peaks, a discord that sounded like cracked glass. Sara drew his bow, the biwa's cord soaring upward, seeking the source of the fracture. Kaido began a steady rainstick cadence, each click a warm droplet of sound meant to melt the icy tension. Aiko lifted her feather, its trill soft as a sigh, and let it drift into the cold wind. Together, their melodies rose, weaving a tapestry of heat and resonance that wrapped around the jagged spires. The ice responded, fissures sealing as the music seeped into the stone. Crystalline chimes rang out, echoing the Guardian's harmony, and the mountains exhaled a sigh of relief. From the highest ridge, a figure emerged, an elder made of frost and light, eyes glimmering with ancient knowledge. He bowed, his voice a chorus of wind and snow. "Your song has thawed the heart of the ice spire," he intoned. "Yet the river of melody flows onward. Beyond the mountains lies the desert of echoes, where the sands have forgotten the cadence of footsteps. Will you carry the song there too?" The Guardians exchanged a glance, their instruments humming in unison. The world's ever-evolving song called them onward, and with each new horizon they stepped into, the harmony grew richer, a living tapestry woven by those willing to listen and to play. The vessel slipped from the icy foothills onto a sea of dunes, its hull humming against the wind as if it were a giant reed in a desert choir. The sun rose in a blaze of amber, scattering shards of light across the rippling sands, each grain catching a faint, resonant vibration that seemed to pulse in time with the Guardian's instruments. Kaido lifted his rainstick, and the first soft clicks fell like distant raindrops on parched earth. The sound traveled far, stirring the dunes to shift in slow, rhythmic waves. Sora drew his bow, the biwa's string singing a low, steady drone that rose and fell like a breath. Aiko lifted her feather, its trill a bright, crystalline note that cut through the heat, scattering the silence that clung to the desert like a veil. As they moved deeper, the sands grew taller, forming arches that rose like the ribs of a forgotten beast. Within the hollow of one such arch, a faint echo returned, a muted chorus of voices that had long been buried beneath the dunes. The guardians paused, listening. The echo was not a song but a memory, a rhythm of footsteps that had once marked a path across the desert. "Listen," Echo whispered, letting the feathers trill mingle with the echo. The note resonated, and the sand beneath their feet began to shift, revealing a narrow corridor of polished stone that glowed faintly with an inner light. The corridor led to a city half buried in the dunes, its towers of glass and sun-baked quartz catching the light and refracting it into a kaleidoscope of colors that danced across the sky. At the city's heart stood a lone figure, draped in flowing robes of woven sand and adorned with a crown of tiny, chime-like shells. Their eyes were the color of storm-clouded horizons, and when they spoke, their voice rolled like a distant thunderstorm. "You have awakened the song of the sands," the figure intoned. "I am Zahara, keeper of the echoes. For centuries the desert has held its breath, the cadence of life lost to the endless wind. Your music has coaxed the forgotten steps back to the surface, but the desert still yearns for a true harmony, a cadence that can bind the wind, the sand, and the sky." Zahara extended a hand, and from it rose a slender instrument of bone and amber, its strings taut with the tension of the desert's heat. "This is the wind harp," she explained. "It can draw the breath of the dunes and shape it into melody. Together, we must teach the desert to sing its own song, so that every footfall, every gust, becomes part of a living chorus." Kaido placed his rainstick beside the wind harp, its clicks now echoing the soft patter of imagined rain. Sora tuned his biwa to the low hum that rose from the sand itself, while Aiko's feather fluttered, tracing spirals in the air that shimmered like mirages. As they began to play, the city responded. Glass towers chimed, quartz spires resonated, and the very ground beneath them thrummed with a deep, resonant bass. The melody swelled, weaving together the rainstick's gentle patter, the biwa's resonant drone, the feather's bright trill, and the wind harp's soaring sighs. The desert wind caught the music, carrying it across the dunes like a living river of sound. Sand grains lifted, swirling in graceful arcs, forming patterns that mirrored the guardian's harmonies. The once silent dunes now sang, each gust a note, each dune a chord, and the entire landscape became a vast, ever-changing symphony. As the final chord faded, Zahara smiled, her eyes reflecting the glittering horizon. "You have given the desert of echoes its voice," she said. "But the river of melody still flows onward. Beyond the dunes lies the verdant abyss, where the forest has forgotten the rhythm of growth. Will you walk that path too?" The guardians exchanged a glance, their instruments humming in quiet anticipation. With the desert song now alive beneath their feet, they felt the world's music expanding, each new landscape a stanza waiting to be written. Together they stepped forward, the wind at their backs and the promise of new harmonies ahead. The harmony deepened, each note a thread weaving through bark and leaf, coaxing dormant saplings to unfurl like green fireflies in the dim understory. As the music rose, a low, resonant pulse emerged from the earth itself, a thrum that seemed older than any instrument the guardians possessed. Lysandra lifted her flute, allowing the pulse to mingle with her melody, and the forest answered with a chorus of unseen voices, the sigh of ancient roots, the whisper of hidden streams, the soft murmur of mosses awakening after centuries of silence. From the heart of the abyss, a fissure cracked open, spilling a veil of silvery mist that curled around the guardian's feet. Within the mist, shapes began to coalesce, shadows of trees that had once stood tall, now reduced to skeletal outlines, their branches reaching like pleading hands. At their center hovered a dark obsidian sphere, pulsing with a faint, discordant beat. The sphere was the source of the forest's forgotten rhythm, a fragment of a broken song that had been swallowed by a lingering grief. Zahara stepped forward, the wind harp humming with the desert's lingering breeze. She drew a single, sustained note, its timbre sharp and clear, cutting through the mist like a blade of light. The note resonated with the sphere, causing it to vibrate and crack, releasing a cascade of fragmented melodies that fluttered like wounded birds. Sora's biwa answered with a deep, grounding drone, anchoring the scattered notes, while Kaido's rainstick sent a cascade of gentle patters that mimicked the sound of rain on newly sprouted leaves. Aiko's feather spun in spirals, each turn scattering luminous specks that settled upon the forest floor, igniting tiny blossoms that glowed with an inner fire. The forest responded in kind. Roots surged upward, intertwining with the glowing specks, forming a lattice of living veins that pulsed with renewed vigor. The once skeletal trees swelled, their bark thickening, their canopies expanding to catch the filtered sunlight that now pierced the mist. The dark sphere shattered, its shards scattering like glass rain, each fragment dissolving into a pure, crystalline tone that merged seamlessly with the Guardian's music. Lysandra lifted her flute once more, this time playing a melody that rose like sunrise, bright and hopeful. The notes rose through the canopy, echoing off the newly formed leaves, and the forest sang back, a full, resonant chorus that filled the verdant abyss with a living symphony. Birds burst from hidden nests, their wings beating in rhythm, while unseen insects added a soft, buzzing counterpoint. The wind, now scented with pine and earth, carried the song outward, reaching the distant dunes and beyond. In the center of the clearing, where the shattered sphere had lain, a small pool of water formed, its surface smooth as glass. From its depths rose a luminous seed, pulsing with a soft golden light. Zahara approached, her eyes reflecting the seed's glow, and whispered, "This is the heart seed, the core of the forest's rhythm. It will grow, and with it, the song of the verdant abyss will endure." Aiko reached out, her feather hovering above the seed, and a single trill escaped her lips, sealing the seed's light with a promise. Kaido tipped his rainstick, letting a final cascade of droplets fall onto the water, each drop a tiny drumbeat that resonated through the pool. Sora bowed his biwa, letting its strings vibrate in harmony with the seed's pulse, while Lysandra's flute sang a lullaby that would guide the seed's growth. The guardians stood together, their instruments still humming, as the forest around them breathed a unified chord. The verdant abyss, once mute and forgotten, now thrummed with life, its rhythm intertwined with the desert's song, forming a tapestry of sound that stretched across the world. With the heartseed planted, the guardians felt a new path open before them, a bridge of melody leading toward the next realm, where mountains waited to hear the echo of stone and sky. Their journey continued, each step a note, each breath a measure, as they moved toward the horizon where the next stanza of the world's great symphony awaited. The mountain guardian extended a hand of crystal, and from its palm a single, resonant chord unfurled, spiraling upward like a vortex of quartz light. The note wrapped around each of the guardians, threading their own melodies into its core. As the chord settled, the very stone beneath their feet began to shift, revealing a hidden passage carved into the mountain's heart, a tunnel of polished basalt that pulsed with a soft, amber glow. Lysandra lifted her flute once more, letting a tentative trill guide them into the cavern. The air inside was cool and fragrant with mineral scent, and the walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in time with their music. Kaido's rainstick produced a gentle patter that echoed like distant waterfalls, while Aiko's feather traced luminous arcs along the stone, illuminating ancient runes that flickered to life with each brushstroke. Sora's biwa resonated a deep, grounding hum that steadied their steps, and Zahara's voice, barely a whisper, sang the names of the forgotten peaks, coaxing the mountain's memory to awaken. As they progressed, the tunnel widened into a vast vaulted chamber, its ceiling vaulted high enough to cradle the sky itself. At its center stood a colossal stone altar, its surface etched with a tapestry of interlocking symbols: sun, moon, wind, and earth, each one a note in the world's primordial score. Upon the altar rested a crystal sphere, its surface swirling with opalescent colors that shifted like sunrise over snow-capped ridges. The mountain guardian approached the sphere, its eyes reflecting the swirling light. "This is the echo core," it intoned, voice reverberating through the stone. "It holds the memory of every mountain song ever sung. To awaken the world's next stanza, we must harmonize its pulse with the heartseed's rhythm." Zahara stepped forward, cradling the heartseed in her palms. The seed's golden glow intensified, matching the sphere's luminescence. She placed it upon the altar, and the two artifacts began to vibrate in tandem, sending ripples of sound through the cavern. Lysandra's flute sang a bright, ascending scale, mimicking the first rays of dawn breaking over a peak. Kaido's rainstick added a cascade of soft, crystalline droplets, each one a tiny bell that rang against the stone. Aiko's feather spun faster, scattering motes of light that settled like frost on the runes, while Sora's biwa laid down a steady, resonant drone that anchored the growing symphony. The combined music swelled, and the echo core responded, its surface fracturing into 1,000 shimmering shards that rose like a flock of silver birds. Each shard carried a fragment of ancient mountain song, echoes of avalanches, the sigh of glaciers, the call of eagles soaring above crags. The shards swirled around the guardians, weaving the old melodies with the fresh pulse of the heartseed. As they merged, a new chord resonated, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate the very foundation of the world. From the center of the chamber, a fissure opened in the stone, widening into a luminous corridor that stretched beyond the mountain's interior. Light poured from it, a cascade of colors that painted the walls with the hues of sunrise, twilight, and starlight. The guardians felt the pull of the melody, a beckoning toward the next realm, a plateau of clouds where the sky itself sang. The mountain guardian bowed its crystalline head, granting them passage. Beyond this threshold lies the celestial plateau, it said, where the wind carries the songs of the heavens. There you will find the sky harp, an instrument that strings the clouds and draws the rain to the earth. Its voice will complete the world's great symphony. With renewed purpose, the guardians stepped into the luminous corridor. The air grew thinner, tinged with the scent of ozone and distant thunder. As they emerged, they found themselves standing on a vast, floating expanse of stone, suspended among the clouds. Below, the world stretched out in a patchwork of forests, deserts, and mountains, all humming with the newly woven melody. Above, the sky was a deep cerulean canvas, streaked with ribbons of aurora that pulsed in time with their heartbeats. In the center of the plateau rose an enormous harp, its frame forged from silvered cloud wood, its strings woven from strands of pure light. The sky harp glowed with an inner fire, each string resonating with the wind's own breath. As the guardians approached, the harp strings sang a soft, welcoming chord, inviting them to join its celestial chorus. Lysandra lifted her flute, its notes intertwining with the harp's ethereal timbre. Kaido's rainstick mimicked the distant rumble of thunder, while Aiko's feather brushed the strings, causing them to shimmer like sunrise on dew. Sora's biwa provided a deep, resonant foundation, and Zahara's voice rose in a clear, soaring chant that echoed across the heavens. Together, their music rose higher and higher, weaving the terrestrial rhythm of the verdant abyss, the stone song of the mountains, and now the airy hymn of the sky into a single, boundless symphony. The sky harp responded, its strings vibrating in perfect harmony, and from its core, a radiant filament of sound unfurled, stretching down toward the world below. As it touched the heartseed, a surge of luminous energy cascaded through the continents, awakening dormant melodies in every corner of the earth. The guardians felt the world's pulse align with theirs, each realm contributing its unique voice to the ever-growing composition. Their journey was far from over. Beyond the celestial plateau lay the oceanic abyss, where the tides sang in deep, rolling chords and the final stanza awaited. Yet for now they stood together on the floating stones, instruments in hand, hearts beating in time with the universe, ready to carry the song onward.